Why did she stop when he called her name, when every instinct told her to keep walking? Mercer. The word landed heavier than it should have. Names did that when spoken with expectation instead of respect. Rowan turned slowly, controlled. Derek Blackwell stood there like a monument carved out of confidence and unchecked belief. Tall, broad, certain the world would move the way he pushed it. Ryan Callahan cracked his knuckles behind him, theatrics hiding nerves. Sloane Monroe watched without smiling, eyes sharp, calculating. "You're awful quiet," Derek said, taking a step closer. "People who stay quiet usually got something to hide." Rowan's expression didn't change. Her voice came out level, almost colorless. "Or they don't need to announce themselves." Ryan snorted. Sloane's jaw tightened. Derek smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Everybody's got something to prove here." "I'm doing fine," Rowan replied. "We'll see." He leaned in just enough to make it clear this wasn't casual conversation. "CQC drill tomorrow, modified assessment. You're with us." Her jaw tightened barely, the first crack. "That's not protocol." "Not tomorrow it is." Derek's voice dropped. "Think of it as accelerated learning." He stepped away before she could answer. Ryan and Sloane followed, leaving silence behind them like a challenge thrown on concrete. Rowan stood alone for a moment, hands loose at her sides, breathing steady. Inside her chest, something old and cold settled into place. She'd been here before. Different uniforms, same test. And high above the field, in an observation tower most recruits never noticed, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Briggs watched through binoculars. He recognized the posture, the stillness, the way she didn't react when reaction was expected. He lowered the binoculars slowly. Some lessons, he knew, could be interrupted. Others had to be survived. That night, the barracks breathed with the restless exhaustion of 200 people pretending to sleep. Rowan lay on her bunk staring at the concrete ceiling, listening to the quiet symphony of shifting bodies and suppressed pain. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the dog tags. Worn smooth, warm from her skin. Mercer Garrett J. Commander USN. Her thumb traced the letters the way it always did, slow, deliberate. A ritual, the only thing she'd kept. She remembered sitting on the edge of her bed at 16, watching her father lace his boots before deployment. "What if something happens?" she asked. He hadn't lied to her, he never did. "Then you remember what I taught you," he'd said. "Watch first, act second, and when you act, make it count." 3 months later, he was dead. Rowan slipped the tags back beneath her pillow. Sleep didn't come. It never did before something important. Morning arrived like a slap. By mid-morning, the company assembled at the CQC field, a white circle painted on packed dirt. Observation stands filling fast. A ripple of unease moved through the recruits when the drill was announced. 3-on-1. Not standard, not even close. Rowan stepped into the circle without protest. She didn't look at Derek, or Ryan, or Sloane. She stood still, centered, like she was stepping into something she'd already accepted. The whistle blew. Derek moved first, fast, aggressive, exactly as expected. Ryan came from the side, Sloane from the other. Rowan shifted, not retreating, not attacking. Derek's momentum carried him past her, frustration flashing across his face, but Ryan's arm hooked her from behind, lifting her off balance. Sloane drove in hard. The ground hit her back with a dull thud. Air left her lungs, weight crushed down, elbows, knees, hands where they shouldn't be. This wasn't instruction anymore. Pain bloomed sharp in her shoulder, familiar, almost comforting in how expected it was. She counted her breaths. 1, 2, 3. Pain was information. The crowd murmured. An instructor stepped forward, then hesitated. "She hasn't submitted," Derek called out, breath hot with certainty. Up in the tower, Briggs gripped the railing until his knuckles went white. Rowan hadn't given the signal. She endured. 456. Derek leaned close, voice low, poisonous. My brother died because a woman froze. Rowan's eyes opened. 7. I'm sorry about your brother, she said, voice muffled against the mat. Calm, clear, but you're wrong. The knife rose, and everything changed. Her hand moved not with anger but precision. Fingers locked onto the nerve. The blade fell. Her hips shifted. Sloane stumbled. Ryan gasped as the air left him. Derek hit the ground hard enough to knock the certainty out of his eyes. Silence fell over the field like a held breath. Rowan stood alone in the circle. Breathing controlled, face unreadable. And then a voice cut through everything. Stop. Marcus Briggs stepped forward. Authority didn't shout, it arrived. The lesson had ended. But the consequences were just beginning. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It waits. Why did the field feel colder after the fight was already over? No one moved at first. Not the recruits packed into the stands. Not the instructors froze in mid-step. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether it was allowed to disturb what had just happened. Rowan Mercer stood at the center of the circle, 3 bodies around her on the mat, her breathing steady but louder than before. Her shoulder burned. Her ribs screamed every time she drew in air. But her eyes stayed forward, disciplined, distant, like she'd already left the moment emotionally and was only waiting for her body to catch up. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Briggs crossed the dirt with a calm that didn't match the storm in his eyes. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Authority moved with him the way gravity moved with planets. He stopped in front of Derek Blackwell first. On your feet, Briggs said. Derek scrambled up, face flushed, wrist cradled instinctively against his chest. Confidence had drained out of him, leaving something raw and frightened behind. You know what you did? Briggs asked quietly. Derek swallowed. Sir, we were. Don't. Briggs cut him off without raising his voice. You don't get to explain violence as training. Briggs turned slightly, addressing all 3 of them now. Ryan was still sucking air like his lungs hadn't forgiven him yet. Sloane stood rigid, eyes wide, guilt already carving deep lines into her expression. You violated protocol. You ignored a cease command, and you turned a drill into an assault. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Briggs finally looked at Rowan. Only for a moment. Not pride, not concern, just confirmation. She gave the smallest nod, the signal she hadn't given before. Now it was over. You, Briggs said to Derek, and you, gesturing to Ryan and Sloane, are done here. The words landed heavier than fists. Sir, Ryan croaked. Effective immediately. Clear your lockers. You're being escorted off base. Derek's mouth opened, closed, his world cracked silently. This isn't about strength, Briggs continued, voice carrying across the field. It's about discipline, and none of you showed any. 2 MPs stepped forward from the perimeter, quiet, efficient. As they escorted the 3 recruits away, no one clapped. No one whispered. Careers didn't end loudly. They ended like this, abrupt and hollow. Only when they were gone did the field seem to breathe again. Rowan felt it then. The shaking. It started in her hands, subtle, almost imperceptible. Adrenaline draining too fast. Pain flooding in to fill the space courage had occupied moments before. Briggs turned to the company. Dismissed. Resume training in 30 minutes. The recruits scattered, conversations erupting the second they were out of earshot. Stories already mutating. Legends forming where facts had stood minutes ago. Rowan stayed where she was. Morrison, the supervising instructor, approached carefully. Mercer, I should have stopped it sooner. You followed protocol, she said quietly, until they didn't. That answer unsettled him more than anger would have. You okay? He asked. She considered lying. I will be. He nodded. Medical tent, that's not optional. She didn't argue. As she walked across the field, eyes followed her, some curious, some reverent, some uncomfortable. She felt exposed in a way she hadn't planned for. She'd never wanted this kind of attention. Visibility came with expectations. Expectations came with pressure. The medical tent smelled like antiseptic and old regret. The corpsman worked efficiently, cataloging bruises with clinical detachment. Shoulder going to swell, he said. Ribs are angry but intact. Lucky, he added. Rowan almost laughed. By evening, the base buzzed with a strange electricity. Her name passed between tables in the mess hall like contraband. She took down 3. Heard her dad was a SEAL. Briggs trained her personally. Don't mess with Mercer. She found an empty seat at the end of a table until a recruit slid a tray across from her. Ellis Thornton, young, earnest, still looked like he was waiting for permission to exist. Mind if I sit? He asked. She nodded. They ate in silence for a moment. Are you okay? He asked finally. I said I will be. He smiled awkwardly. That's not a no. He hesitated, then spoke faster like he might lose the nerve. Someone been helping me with gear setups, adjustments, stuff I didn't know I was doing wrong. Rowan sipped her coffee. It tasted like burnt metal. Hypothetically, Ellis continued, if that was you it helped. A lot. She didn't look at him. Hypothetically, you're the one doing the work. He nodded, relieved. Still, thanks. That night the barracks felt emptier. People gave her space now. A respectful distance. The kind that looked like admiration from far away but felt like isolation up close. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Medical tent, 2200 unofficial. She knew who it was. Briggs sat alone in the office, her file open on the desk. Show me, he said. She turned, revealing the bruises, purple blooming deep, angry. His jaw tightened. You took hits you didn't need to. I needed them to believe it wasn't personal. They nearly broke you. They didn't. Briggs leaned back, studying her like he had when she was 19 and angry at the world. Your father said the same thing once. That name still hit like shrapnel. He died because he pushed through injuries, Briggs continued softly, because he believed pain was weakness. Rowan looked away. I didn't teach you to ignore pain, he said. I taught you to listen to it. Silence stretched. I don't know how else to do this, she admitted. If I respond too fast, I'm aggressive. If I don't, I'm weak. Briggs nodded. Welcome to the burden of being first. He closed the file. You're not here to prove women can survive this, he said. You're here to prove the system needs to change. The weight of that settled slowly. Outside, the base continued its rhythm, training, orders, preparation. Rowan lay in her bunk later, staring into darkness, dog tags warm against her chest. She survived the fight. But survival wasn't the hardest part. Being seen was. Sometimes strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it endures long enough to force the world to look, and then asks what kind of world that really is. Why did the night feel heavier now that everyone knew her name? Rowan lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the barracks settled into uneasy quiet, the kind that came not from peace but from exhaustion layered over uncertainty. Somewhere down the row, someone coughed. Another recruit shifted, springs creaking softly beneath their bunk. 200 bodies, all pretending sleep would solve what the day had carved into them. It didn't. Her shoulder throbbed in slow, deliberate pulses. Each breath brushed against bruised ribs, reminding her that control had a cost. She welcomed the pain. It kept her anchored. What unsettled her was the silence around her, the space people now left, the unspoken distance that felt heavier than open hostility. Before the drill, she had been invisible. After it, she was a story. She reached beneath her pillow and pulled out the dog tags again. The metal was cool now, no longer warmed by adrenaline. She rolled them between her fingers, grounding herself in the familiar weight. Prove yourself once, then spend your life making sure others don't have to. Her father's words, spoken years ago, written once and now living in her bones. Morning came too fast. By 500 the base was already alive. Orders barked, boots struck pavement, but something had shifted. Conversation stalled when she passed. Eyes flicked away too quickly or held a second too long. Respect maybe, or fear, or confusion about how to treat someone who'd shattered expectations without raising her voice. She reported to training as scheduled. Same drills, same obstacles, different atmosphere. During a grappling exercise, her partner hesitated before engaging. "You don't have to hold back," Rowan said quietly. "I'm not," he replied too quickly. She ended the exchange with clean, controlled efficiency. No flourish, no dominance, just precision. When she released him, she stepped back immediately, gave space, let him recover his pride. That mattered more than winning. By mid-morning, Briggs called her in. "Colonel Hartwick wants to meet you, unofficial." Her stomach tightened. Colonel James Hartwick wasn't just another officer. He was the one writing the future, evaluating whether women belonged in roles that broke people for a living. His opinion would ripple far beyond this base. Hartwick's office smelled faintly of old paper and coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The chair she was offered sat slightly lower than his. Intentional. He watched her closely before speaking. "I served with your father," he said at last. She nodded once. "Yes, sir." "Good man, exceptional operator." A pause, also stubborn. The resemblance wasn't lost on him. "You absorbed unnecessary punishment yesterday," Hartwick continued. "Why?" She chose honesty. "Because if I'd responded immediately, it would have been framed as aggression. I needed to demonstrate restraint." "At the cost of your body." "Yes, sir." Hartwick leaned back. "That concerns me." She didn't argue. "I'm not evaluating whether you can handle this," he said. "You can. I'm evaluating whether this institution can." That surprised her. "Yesterday showed me the culture isn't ready," Hartwick continued. "And asking women to endure abuse silently isn't equality. It's a different kind of sacrifice." Rowan felt something shift. Recognition, not agreement but understanding. "What would you change?" he asked. She inhaled carefully. "The metrics, we measure worth through suffering, that breaks everyone eventually. Men prove themselves through dominance, women through endurance, both lose." Hartwick studied her for a long moment. "Your recommendation?" he asked. "Don't delay integration waiting for culture to fix itself," she said. "It won't. Change it deliberately, or it will never change at all." When she left the office, her legs felt heavier than before. This wasn't about her anymore. It never had been. In the memorial courtyard, Derek Blackwell waited. Out of uniform, smaller somehow, less sharp-edged. "I asked to speak with you," he said. She almost walked past him. But she stopped. He didn't make excuses, didn't ask forgiveness. He told her about his brother, about fear, about how grief had turned into something ugly because no one had taught him what to do with it. "You became fear," she said quietly, "wearing a uniform." He nodded. "I know." She saw it then, the cost of strength misused, how easily pain became cruelty when left unchecked. "I can't undo what I did," he said, "but I want to be better than it." She believed him. Not because of his words, but because of how tired he looked. That night alone again, Rowan stared at the ceiling and let doubt in, just for a moment. What if changing the system cost more than she could give? What if being strong wasn't enough? Outside, the base hummed with preparation for wars that might never come. Inside, Rowan faced a quieter battle, learning that resilience wasn't just enduring pain. Sometimes it was choosing a different path entirely. And sometimes, dignity didn't demand victory. It demanded change. Why did victory feel heavier now than the moment she'd been pinned to the ground? 6 weeks passed in a way Rowan would later struggle to explain. Each day felt deliberate, slow, demanding attention to detail and discipline. And yet the weeks vanished almost without warning, like water slipping through clenched fingers. The bruises faded. The ribs stopped protesting with every breath. But the base itself didn't return to what it had been before. It couldn't. People talked differently now. Not louder, not kinder, just more careful. The 3-on-1 drills were quietly removed from the schedule. Reporting protocols were revised. Instructors stopped letting character-building moments drift into cruelty. Nothing dramatic. No speeches. No announcements. Just small corrections made by people who had realized, perhaps for the first time, that tradition wasn't the same thing as wisdom. And at the center of all of it, whether she wanted the attention or not, was Rowan Mercer. She stood near the edge of the training hall one afternoon, arms folded loosely, observing recruits cycle through close-quarters exercises. She wasn't participating today. She was evaluating, clipboard in hand, notes precise, unemotional. Technique over aggression. Control under pressure. Immediate correction of unsafe behavior. Across the mat, Marcus Briggs supervised with his usual intensity. He caught her eye once and nodded. Not approval, trust. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn right away, but she felt the shift. Presence carried weight when it arrived with hesitation. Derek Blackwell stood just inside the hall. Civilian clothes, a duffel bag at his feet, shoulders drawn in like someone stepping into a place he no longer believed he belonged. She turned then. "You're back," she said. "Not officially," he replied. "I asked for a meeting with Colonel Hartwick, petition for reinstatement, probationary." That took effort and humility. "He said he'd listen," Derek continued, "only if you were willing to speak on my behalf." Rowan studied him. 6 weeks ago he'd been a force of momentum and certainty. Now he looked hollowed, like someone who had lost something and decided not to replace it with anger this time. "I'll tell him exactly what happened," she said. "I'd expect nothing less." He exhaled slowly. "Thank you." Later that day, Colonel Hartwick summoned her again. This time, Briggs was already there. Hartwick didn't waste time. "I've made my recommendation." The words settled into the room like gravity. "Full integration," Hartwick said, "with a 3-year implementation timeline." Rowan felt her chest loosen slightly. "Year 1 focuses on culture, policy, accountability," he continued. "Year 2 introduces controlled pilot programs. Year 3 expands based on results." "And me?" she asked. "You," Hartwick said, "are being offered a consulting role in training development. Active status maintained. Your job would be to help redesign this program so it builds operators instead of breaking them." She hadn't expected that. Briggs smiled faintly. "You already started doing the job. We're just making it official." The weight of it settled in slowly. This wasn't about proving she belonged anymore. This was about making sure others didn't have to bleed to earn the same space. "One condition," Hartwick added. "Blackwell, Callahan, and Monroe have petitioned for reinstatement. I'm inclined to approve, but only if you agree." Rowan thought of Derek's eyes in the memorial courtyard, of Sloane's silence during the assault, of Ryan's hesitation that had come too late. "I'll speak with them," she said, "individually." Sloane Monroe came first. She looked smaller than Rowan remembered, not weaker, just stripped of armor. "I was jealous," Sloane said without preamble, "of how effortless you made it look." "It wasn't effortless," Rowan replied. "I know that now," Sloane's voice cracked. I thought there was only room for one exceptional woman, so I tried to push you out. That belief hurts everyone, Rowan said quietly. I want to come back, Sloane said, not to compete, to help. Rowan believed her. Ryan's meeting was shorter, simpler. I followed because it was easier than standing alone, he admitted. I won't do that again. Honesty counted. When Derek returned, folder in hand, research meticulously compiled, Rowan understood something important. Redemption wasn't about apologies. It was about work. That night, Rowan stood alone in the memorial courtyard, fingers resting against the engraved name she knew by heart. I'm trying to do this right, she murmured, not just survive it. The fountain burbled softly beside her. She wasn't invisible anymore. And for the first time, she wasn't trying to be. Sometimes strength doesn't come from standing alone. Sometimes it comes from standing differently and inviting others to rise with you. Why did the air feel heavier the moment the orders came down? Rowan felt it before she read the message. The shift, the tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with injury or exhaustion. She stood in the operations building hallway, fluorescent lights humming overhead, tablet glowing in her hands. Unscheduled deployment briefing, restricted attendance, immediate. Her name sat in the middle of the list, like it had been waiting there all along. This wasn't training anymore. Inside the briefing room, the door sealed with a soft hiss. 12 seats, 11 occupied. Conversations died as she entered, not because she commanded the room, but because people were recalibrating how to speak around her. That never stopped being strange. Briggs stood at the head of the table, Hartwick beside him. A map glowed behind them, all sharp lines and cold data. 2 nights ago, Hartwick began, a joint surveillance drone went dark over the Kandar corridor. Rowan's eyes tracked the terrain, mountain passes, narrow roads, a place where mistakes echoed forever. The recovery team sent in yesterday hasn't checked in, Briggs added. Last transmission was fragmented, possible hostile contact, no confirmation. A pause. This is not a combat operation, Hartwick said carefully. Officially, it's reconnaissance and extraction. Unofficially, everyone knew better. Rowan listened, absorbed. She didn't lean forward, didn't nod. She waited until the weight of the room settled. You want eyes without escalation, she said. Minimal footprint, someone who can move unseen. Briggs met her gaze. Yes. And you want it quiet, she added, because if this goes wrong, it can't exist. Hartwick didn't deny it. The room held its breath. I'll go, Rowan said. No heroics, no hesitation. A few heads turned. One operator frowned. With respect, he said, this isn't a pilot program. Rowan looked at him, calm, level. It's exactly that. Silence followed, not resistance, consideration. Hartwick nodded once, approved. Preparation was surgical. Gear checked twice. Routes memorized until they lived behind her eyes. She moved through the armory with practiced ease, muscle memory taking over where emotion threatened to intrude. Ellis watched from the doorway. Be careful, he said. She gave him a look that softened the edges. I always am. He hesitated. You don't have to carry this alone. I know, she replied, but this part I do. Night swallowed the landscape as the aircraft dropped her beyond the ridge line. Wind tore at her gear as she descended, boots hitting dirt with barely a sound. Alone. She preferred it this way. Every step forward demanded attention. The ground was uneven, the dark alive with imagined threats. She moved not quickly but deliberately, letting the terrain speak before responding. She found the drone wreckage first, scattered, deliberately dismantled. Someone wanted it silent. Further up the pass, she found signs of the team. Drag marks, blood not enough to suggest death but enough to slow them down. Her jaw tightened. She followed the trail for hours, senses stretched thin. Every sound meant something. Every shadow deserved respect. She found them at dawn. 3 operators, bound alive. She waited, watched the pattern. The guards rotated lazily, overconfident, underestimating what patience could do. She moved when the light was weakest, when the sun confused shadows and men relied too heavily on sight. It was quiet, too quiet to be dramatic. A hand over a mouth, a blade pressed just enough, a whispered command that carried certainty. When it was over, she untied the first operator. "You took your time," he rasped. She allowed herself a breath. "You're welcome." Extraction was messy. One of them couldn't walk. She adjusted, compensated, shifted weight without complaint. By the time the aircraft appeared, she was running on resolve alone. Back at base, medics took over. Reports were filed. Stories trimmed down to what could be said. Hartwick met her outside the debrief room. "You didn't escalate," he said. "No," she replied. "I ended it." He studied her. "You could have called for support." "I didn't need to," she said quietly, "and neither did they." That night, alone in her bunk, Rowan finally let herself feel it. The fear she'd ignored, the exhaustion she'd postponed, the quiet pride she didn't know what to do with. She pressed the dog tags to her chest. She wasn't proving anything anymore. She was becoming something. And sometimes redemption didn't come with applause. Sometimes it came with silence, and the knowledge that when it mattered, you chose right. Why did the silence feel louder after she came back alive? Rowan noticed it the moment she stepped onto the base again. Not relief, not celebration, just a strange, reverent quiet, as if the ground itself was taking note of her footsteps. The operators she'd brought home were already being processed through medical. There would be reports, evaluations, words written carefully enough to say everything without admitting too much. She didn't attend the debrief. Briggs excused her. "Go breathe," he said, "before this turns into something it shouldn't." She walked instead toward the far edge of the base, where the memorial courtyard opened into a strip of desert no one bothered to name. The sun was low. Orange light stretched shadows long and thin across stone and steel. For the first time since the deployment, her hands shook. Not from fear. From release. She sat on the edge of the low wall and let it happen. The breath she'd been holding for days came out in pieces, short, uneven, human. She pressed her palms together until the tremor eased. This was the part no one trained you for. Not the mission, not the violence. Coming back. Behind her, footsteps approached, familiar rhythm unhurried. Briggs stopped a few feet away. "You changed the board," he said. Rowan didn't look at him. "I just did the job." "That's how it starts," he replied. "That's how it always starts." She finally turned. "I don't want this to turn into a myth." "It won't," Briggs said. "Not if you keep telling the truth." They stood in silence for a moment. "Colonel Hartwick's recommendation was approved," Briggs added. "Full integration. Oversight committee formed. You're officially listed as operational consultant." Rowan closed her eyes briefly. "How many?" she asked. "First class is 8 women," he said. "Next year more." 8. A number small enough to protect, large enough to matter. "They're going to face what I did," she said. "Yes," Briggs answered honestly, "but not alone and not unchallenged." That mattered. The ceremony was quiet. No cameras, no speeches written to inspire, just names on a list, read once and then filed away. The 3 operators she'd extracted stood nearby, alive, walking. One of them caught her eye and nodded, gratitude without debt. Derek Blackwell stood at the back. Reinstated, probationary, watching not speaking, learning, she hoped, what restraint actually looked like. Later that night, Rowan sat at her desk, paperwork stacked neatly in front of her. the future organized into forms and policy language, necessary, incomplete. She picked up a pen, paused, then slid the papers aside. She reached for a blank page instead. Not a report, not an evaluation. A letter to no one. She wrote about the drill, about the silence before she moved, about how fear felt different when you accepted it instead of fighting it. She wrote about endurance and about the danger of glorifying it. She wrote about dignity. By the time she finished, dawn had crept in through the window. She folded the page once, twice, tucked it into her pocket. Some truths didn't belong in official records. They belonged in memory. As the base woke, Rowan walked toward the training field again. Recruits were already gathering, some nervous, some eager, some pretending not to be afraid. She stopped at the edge and watched. One of the new women caught her eye, hesitant, watching everything, saying nothing. Rowan stepped closer. "You don't have to be loud to belong here," she said quietly. The woman nodded, relief flickering across her face. Rowan turned back toward the field. She wasn't a symbol. She wasn't a legend. She was an operator who had learned something the hard way and chosen to carry it forward. Sometimes strength doesn't shout. Sometimes it doesn't even strike back. Sometimes dignity simply acts and leaves the world no choice but to change.